My name is James Holden. I'm the director of the Cloud Analytics team, and I'm responsible for cloud insights and our ability to look at cost optimization within the cloud. So what we're doing within our Cloud Analytics group is we're looking at building out a tool set that monitors all the kind of performance, all the kind of configuration, all the inventory information, not just from on-premises infrastructure, but from the public cloud as well. And there's a whole kind of wealth of information and kind of metrics and capabilities that we can bring to the forefront with understanding the cost of the infrastructure. So what we have in Cloud Insights today is our ability to annotate the data and put price points against all the different components. What we're going to show you now is a little bit of a preview of our upcoming functionality where it drills further into that cost information and actually starts extracting the billing information from the hyperscalers themselves and the kind of price points and discounts that are available for the end customer. So there's a huge amount of different concerns a customer has about the cost of their infrastructure. First of all, they need to be able to understand what's going on. What is the price point? What am I actually paying for? Where is my costs actually coming from? Which department is got the biggest spend, or what account, or which geo is actually doing it? How is that cost actually broken down into different regions? So as a manager of an environment and wanting to understand how much is being spent, it's kind of crucial to understand what that breakdown is and how I can drill into it and configure it to get that visibility. The final piece about it is, does it meet my budget? I know that I have a predicted spend. I have to publicize it up the organization to the CFO level. What am I going to spend on my cloud infrastructure? Am I actually in line with that? Am I going above it? Am I going below it? Can I do something different around it? So the other concern that they have is, if I have this information, how do I analyze it? How do I make sure that there's no kind of sudden increases in cost? Or is there any opportunities to reduce the cost? What is it? How do I project it over time? So within our Cloud Insights team, we've actually got a little amusing story about how we was looking at the real-time cost of the infrastructure. We had a QA engineer decided he wanted to run a scale test, and he spun up a few more EC2 instances than he actually should have done. And the bill at the end of the month leapt up 5 or 6 times what was the kind of predicted cost for that month. Now, on the 6-figure AWS bill, that's kind of noticeable. So what we wanted to be able to do is get ahead of that game as soon as that starts occurring. You want to know virtually within the first day or first hour that someone has just spun up another 100 EC2 instances, and it's going to, of the biggest sort they could possibly find, to run scale tests. So we have the ability to look against all of those different pieces and understand what's going on. The final customer concern we've been seeing is, how do you optimize that infrastructure? There's a lot of different pricing models and little different ways you can reduce cost within the hyperscalers, but am I at the optimal price model? Is there anything better they can do? Hyperscalers themselves offer recommendations, but is that the most kind of appropriate recommendation, or is there some other incentive that they're looking at there? Do you want to trust them, or do you want to trust a third party to actually give you recommendations? So we can look at right sizing, and I showed that in the earlier overview demonstration. We can remove waste, and we can give recommendations on where there should be spot instance or reserved instance usage. So here I've got a early preview screenshot of our now cloud cost functionality that is coming out in the next few months. What we're doing is we're looking for those opportunities to reduce costs. So I've got a full breakdown of the monthly spend. So I want to know what I'm actually looking at. I want to know if it's ticked up, if it's actually in line with my projection, how optimized it is, what kind of purchasing opportunities I might have. Can I get some more reserved instances because there is spot instances I can buy? What my analysis of the waste is. How much savings can I do by doing things like removing those EBS volumes that are orphaned out there, or moving from a GP2 down to an SC1? And are there any cost alerts? Any of those budget overruns where my QA engineer has gone crazy with the corporate account? So I can see what the annual spend is, what my average unit cost is. Again, it gives me, as a manager, understanding of, is it within my predictions? Am I going on out of ranges? And so what I can then do.
Just to clarify, the slides are using terminology specific to AWS.
They are using it, but it will be, yes.
Across the platform.
It will go across the platform, yes.
Yeah.
So first of all, we'll release with AWS, and then we'll build out for most likely Azure, and then for GCP. And we'll also want to do this for things like the Kubernetes side of the house as well. So that cost optimization, we see it as being applicable to the entire environment. The easiest side to do is the hyperscaler for now, because it's very structured in terms of there's a billing file, you know exactly what the spend is. But then we're going to move it across, and we're going to do all the rest of the components as well.
With all
Did I just jump 2 slides? I did, yeah.
You said will, when?
So we're coming out with this functionality in the next few months. So it'll be drop as just a feature into our standard edition, and then we'll iterate on top of that with the other hyperscalers. So Azure will follow, then GCP, and then we'll hit the stuff like the Kubernetes side of the house.
With all of the connections that you have to your on-prem environment,
yes,
will there eventually be the ability to look at that data and then kind of predict, okay, what would it cost if this were running in the cloud?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, because if you've got, and we can do a lot of that actual work today with the kind of the annotation and the performance metrics that we've got. We can see exactly what you're running on your VMware environment, and we can look to see what kind of CPU utilization it is and how many cores it's got, what OS it is, all that inventory. Combine it with the performance data, we can then annotate with price points against it, and then you can see how much it's costing, approximately what it is costing you today to run it like it is. If you then do a like-for-like move and push it up into the cloud, we can then tell you that it's got 4 cores, it's got 8 gigs of RAM. It looks like it's going to be a memory-optimized MX4 large device, and that would then cost you X number of dollars. Yep. So we can get the reports and the kind of data that will help you do that. What we find, though, is a lot of customers aren't going that route. They're not going for the like-for-like migration, because it's often a case of you have to refactor your applications to run up in the cloud. When we started looking at moving on-command Insight to run in the cloud and running it as a monolith, we ran into a whole host of different problems where uptime of the AWS services, or just the kind of different access patterns and the different I/O profiles you get of that storage, that it wasn't really practical for us to do so. It was far more practical for us to kind of look at a refactoring of the application and building it out using some of the more kind of innovative services that the likes of the hyperscalers are coming to the front with. Running Aurora as a database, or RDS, or instances, rather than going with just taking a VM and moving it up there. Yep.
It'll be really interesting to see what algorithm you come up with, because in certain situations where customers are migrating to the cloud, I've seen things like 13 vCPUs and 2 gigs of RAM, and the other way around, 1 vCPU but 20 gigs of RAM, something like that.
Yep.
And how do you actually translate that into an instance size?
Yeah, so we have the metrics, so what it's running on today. We can tell you if it's performing well or badly today. So then it's a case of you making that judgment call. Like I say, I don't feel that a lot of organizations want to go that route. I feel they go more of the, let me take the application itself and see if there's alternate ways of running it. Either I'll now consume it as a SaaS offering from the vendor, or I will, if it's a homegrown one, do I refactor it to run it in the cloud? Because availability changes. I'm not getting my 5 or 6 nines of availability. I'm getting 3 nines if I'm running in AWS. So I now have to make my infrastructure resilient rather than redundant. Yep. So what I clicked on then was actually I started to do a drill down. And what I've now got is our ability to then break it down by the different accounts, the different regions, and all the different instance types within the environment. So I've now got all the cost pieces, but also what is the savings I can attribute to running on these. So if I wanted to go with recommendations, this is telling me that if I look at this master account and I want to increase the number of reserved instances, this is how many it should be, and this is going to be my annual savings from doing so. And I can choose the tenancy, if it's going to be dedicated, or what term, subscription term I'm going for on those. And what we're doing is we're running an algorithm that's looking for, it's really kind of the knee of the curve. I want to know the right number of reserved instances. Oh, the other way of looking at it is the Goldilocks approach. I don't want my porridge too hot. I don't want my porridge too cold. I want it just to be right. And what we're doing is we're finding that just right. So we're looking at all the utilization. We're looking at how often that type of instance has been available in the environment, how many hours in a day. Because people run tens of instances or hundreds of instances. What we can then start doing is working out where the right and the optimal amount is. And again, here there's what the current level of reserved instances is and what we're actually recommending the increase to should be. And at that point, it starts drastically saving money. And we've actually implemented all this functionality internally on our Cloud Insights infrastructure. So we've now got a very optimal spend around what we're doing with our own EC2 instances.
So specifically on RIs, you're only showing 2 weeks worth of data there, and you're making a 1 year to 3 year commit on RIs.
Yeah. It's actually based on the last 24 hours in this preview piece. But what I can do is I've got that 90 days in my standard edition, and I've got 13 months in my premium edition. So if I wanted to go further back, I can go further back.